Yo, what's up guys, welcome to my humble YouTube channel where I bring you fanfiction that will brighten your days. Before we start, a subscribe is greatly appreciated, and don't forget to leave a like and ring the bell icon so you won't miss exciting new fanfiction stories. Tensura. Melting the Eternal Frost by JackDaWeb Chapter 10, A Spar Between Gods. Rimuru's POV. We were now inside my office and ready to discuss the matter at hand. I was sitting at my desk with Veldora and Rimuru standing beside me. In front of me was Luminous with Lewis and Hinata by her side. Shuna then walked into the room and served us good tea along with some delicious snacks. After nodding simultaneously out of courtesy, the six of us took a sip of our tea. Luminous and Lewis's eyes widened in surprise upon taking their first sip. "This tea is excellent, Rimuru-san," Luminous praised genuinely while nodding with a smile. "Indeed, Luminous-sama," Lewis agreed. "You'll have to thank Shuna for that. She's without a doubt the best tea brewer in Tempest," I stated proudly. We all placed our cups down and wiped our mouths in a mannerly fashion. "So, Rimuru-san, you wanted to discuss forming diplomatic relations with Lubelios with me, correct?" she asked calmly, and I nodded in confirmation. "Yes. I was thinking that if we had a peace treaty and official diplomatic ties we could exchange technology and culture. What do you think, Luminous-san?" I asked her opinion, and a small grin formed on her face. "Ha ha ha. It looks like we're on the same wavelength, Rimuru-san. I thought the same thing when Hinata told me about your request," she answered enthusiastically, and I widened my eyes a bit. "I see. That's good then. But I do have one concern though," I said, and paused for a moment. It looks like she immediately understood what I meant. "The decree of the church that says all monsters are enemies of humanity, correct?" she asked to confirm, and I nodded. "It wouldn't bode well if that were suddenly changed or abolished altogether. I'm sure there would be an uproar among the people if that happened," I explained with a hint of concern, but Luminous seemed unfazed. "While it's true that the decree poses a minor inconvenience, my word as the god of the Western Holy Church is law. I could simply state that monsters, specifically citizens of Tempest, are not a threat to humanity. It might take a few years for the nations to accept it, but they don't have a choice in the matter," she stated confidently with a dismissive shrug, and her two companions nodded in confirmation. I mentally sighed in relief, since my biggest concern was not a problem anymore. "That's good to know. Hee. I guess I was worried for nothing," I joked shyly, slightly embarrassed. Foo. You worry too much, Rimu-kun," Veldora teased suddenly. My head quickly turned to face her. "Oi. I don't want to force my way into a peaceful coexistence with humanity, alright?" I said tiredly, a bit annoyed, which amused her. After shaking my head, I turned back to Luminous. "Sigh, anyway. Since we're both on the same page, would you like to make the agreement official?" I asked for confirmation. "Gladly," she affirmed with a smile and extended her hand, which I shook firmly. "Yosh. Then let's also put this agreement on paper," I announced enthusiastically as I pulled out a fancy-looking box and a scroll with the official peace treaty written on it. Unraveling the scroll, I began reading aloud the statement. "Ehem. This treaty officially recognizes the diplomatic relations between the Jura Tempest Federation and the Holy Empire of Lubelios. The nature of this alliance and partnership involves the following terms: peace between the two nations, ability to engage in economic trade, lending assistance in times of crisis, exchange of technology and culture. Excluding unforeseen circumstances, this treaty will last indefinitely. May peace and prosperity grace both nations. And now all we have to do is just sign at the space at the bottom to declare our alliance official," I explained, and put the scroll down for them to see. Luminous read through the scroll herself and put it back on the desk with an approving nod. I took out 2 pens from underneath the desk cabinet and we signed the treaty, formally validating our diplomatic relations. I rolled the scroll, placed it inside the small box, and then made a copy of the box with the document inside it before handing it to Luminous. "It's a pleasure to be working with you, Luminous-san," I said gratefully while extending my hand out. Ha. You can drop the honorifics. We're seated on the same council, you know," she replied playfully, and then shook my hand. "You too, Luminous. Just call me Rimuru from now on," I replied gladly. "Now that that's settled, would you guys like to have a tour around Tempest later?" I asked earnestly as I saw Hinata's eyes light up in excitement. That would be nice, Rimuru. Luminous replied with a smile. We would be grateful for it, Rimuru-san. Lewis said with a respectful bow. Alright then. We'll tour you around after I have a spar with a certain someone, I said excitedly as everyone's eyes turned to me. Era, who are you planning to spar with, Rimuru-kun? Velzard asked curiously. I grinned widely as I closed one of my eyes and raised my index finger in the air. He. The Storm Dragon and my sworn brother, Veldora, I answered boldly, and everyone had a look of surprise. Luminous looked like she nearly spat out her drink. The Storm Dragon? You're gonna spar with the Storm Dragon? Luminous asked in absolute disbelief while Velzard looked at me curiously and spoke up. Era, so my little brother agreed to spar with you? She questioned curiously. Yes. I asked him if I could have a sparring match and he gladly accepted. I answered enthusiastically, and our three guests had their jaws wide open in response. Rimuru, I don't doubt your strength. I'm going to be honest, as much as I hate to admit it, you are stronger than me. But Veldora is a true dragon. As true demon lords don't stand a chance against them unless you're Guy or Milam. She voiced loudly with a hint of concern in her voice. Fu. Don't underestimate Rimuru-kun, Luminous-san. While it is true that he is below that of a true dragon, he is also far above the level of your average true demon lord. And I believe that Rimuru-kun has some tricks he'd like to try out. Velzard explained calmly, which somewhat reassured them. I see. Then, I'd like to ask something if you don't mind. Hinata chimed in timidly and I nodded, urging her to proceed. Between you and the Storm Dragon, who would win, him or you? She asked curiously, and a devious grin formed on my face as I felt a cheeky reference coming up. Well, if he got a little serious, it might cause me a bit of trouble, I answered calmly and paused. I looked Hinata straight in the eye, hoping that she'd say the next line. But would you lose? She questioned firmly. Ha. No way, she said the thing. I smirked before giving my answer. Nah, I'd win, I stated confidently. With that, I finally got to utter that iconic line. The three of them were dumbfounded but also couldn't deny my words. Benimaru had a proud smirk on his face and chuckled lightly. Velzard giggled softly and put her hand on my shoulder. Era, you seem rather confident, Rimuru-kun. Although Veldora-kun is no match for me, he's still a true dragon, you know? Are you confident you can win? She asked jokingly, already knowing the answer. I'd say I have a good 60 to 70% chance of beating him in a fair fight. Besides, it's not a match to the death, just a friendly spar. You guys can watch if you'd like, I answered honestly, and Benimaru perked up. Could we also watch your spar with Veldora-sama? He asked expectantly. Of course. You can let the other executives know about it too. Velzard will erect a barrier to contain our battle while you guys watch from outside, I said excitedly as I smashed my fists together. Our three guests looked at one another before nodding in agreement. Yosh. Looks like they'll be watching. Nice, he. I get to show off to my fellow demon lord and guests. Benimaru promptly excused himself from the office to inform my executives of the upcoming spar. Once everyone was ready, I teleported us to an open field on the outskirts of the city. The fresh breeze immediately landed on our skin and I stretched out my arms. Using thought communication, I let Veldora know that I was ready and waiting, and he began flying in our direction. My other executives made it just in time to witness the grand spectacle that was about to take place. The executives who will be spectating are Benimaru, Diablo, Gabiru, Gobta, Geld, Hakuro, Ranga, Shion, Shuna, Sue, and Zijin. Luminous and her two subordinates, Hinata and Lewis, will also be watching. Not long after everyone arrived, a large shadow loomed over the field as my opponent made his presence known. Flying high in the sky and in his majestic dragon form was the Storm Dragon himself, Veldora Tempest. He landed on the ground just a few dozen meters away from the group. The force of his massive body crashing down carved out a decently sized crater and sent debris flying everywhere. Sigh, seriously, old man? Such a dramatic entrance. Kuahahahahaha. It is I, the mighty Storm Dragon. Anyone who faces me shall perish, he declared extremely loudly, the sheer volume of his voice shaking the air. Luckily, Velzard shielded us from the incoming debris and the boom of his roar. Once the dust settled, I began walking away from the group and towards the massive figure of Veldora. Once I was a few meters in front of him, I stopped and looked up at his face. He is truly a divine and majestic being when he's in his dragon form. Glad you could make it, Veldora. I thought you would be too scared to show up, I said in provocation, and a massive grin formed on his face. Ha! I would never be scared of a mere sparring match unless you're my elder sister. You may be my sworn brother, but I will make sure to push you past your limits, Rimuru, he declared loudly and confidently. Velzard smiled with approval at his statement about her. Yeah, give it your best shot, Veldora. Let's begin, Vels-chan, I announced loudly and turned to look at Velzard and the group behind me. Hearing my words, Velzard snapped her fingers and a large circular barrier around 200 meters in diameter enclosed me and Veldora. We were now practically cut off from the outside world since this barrier was an extension of her impenetrable snow crystal. Veldora turned back into his human form and a stare-down between us began. Kuahahahahaha. I hope you're ready for some tough training, Rimuru, he said excitedly as he assumed a fighting stance. At his words, a wide grin formed on my face. Ha ha ha. You'll be thoroughly eating your words in a moment, sworn brother, I replied confidently and took my own fighting stance. The air was tense as we held our positions in a standoff. I was confident in my skills and capabilities, so I decided to go into this battle without the assistance of Seal. Having always depended on her since I reincarnated into this world, I thought it was about time to improve myself. In a flash, Veldora disappeared from his spot and was now right in front of me. Even with 10 million times the thought processing speed, his movement was just barely trackable for me. I noticed the surge of magicules coming from him concentrated around his fist as it began violently giving off black sparks. Kuahahahahaha. Don't get lost in thought during a battle, Rimuru. Eat this, black flash. Veldora yelled loudly as his impending fist rocketed toward my stomach. My barrier barely managed to absorb the full force of the hit and remnants of black sparks emanated from the contact point. The blow was still powerful enough to send me flying back several dozen meters and I nearly lost my balance upon landing. This guy is really using moves from Jujutsu Kaisen. Sigh, what a weeb. I guess I'll fight fire with fire. Continuing his assault, he dashed at me and aimed a powerful kick at my head, but this time I was ready. I swiftly ducked underneath his kick and delivered my own black flash straight into his gut, sending him flying upwards. This attack is really just a powerful punch infused with storm magic, but Veldora has affectionately named it after the infamous critical strike from his favorite manga. Veldora looked stunned for a moment when he landed on his feet a few meters away. Obviously, an attack using the storm element wouldn't damage him, it was more for fun if I'm being honest. Regaining his composure, Veldora assumed a different stance and grinned with excitement. Kuahahahahaha. So you're using knowledge from the sacred texts as well, Rimuru. Good choice, he stated loudly. I smirked at his statement and assumed a stance of my own. Ha ha ha. You fool. You merely adopted the sacred texts, and from me no less. I was born in it, molded by it. You could never compare your knowledge of manga to mine, I replied boldly but also jokingly. Veldora chuckled loudly at my words and he prepared his next attack. Then we shall see, Rimuru, come at me with all you've got, he commanded strongly and I happily obliged. In less than a millisecond, we closed the gap between us. The sheer force generated by our speed created two powerful shockwaves that would have immediately ruptured a human's internal organs if they were standing close by. During that short time frame, Veldora manifested a god-grade sword made of pure condensed magicules and aimed a slash at my torso. Responding equally as fast, I unsheathed my sword, which I recently named Fangs of the Devourer. Surprisingly, the act of naming my sword caused it to evolve into a god-grade weapon. Our swords collided with full force and the sound of them hitting each other generated a frightening shockwave that blasted off in every direction away from us. In terms of brute strength, Veldora easily surpassed me, but I made up for it with better technique. We began relentlessly slashing at one another, yet couldn't land a single hit since we parried and dodged each attack perfectly. Realizing that melee combat was pointless, Veldora placed some distance between us and started firing off a barrage of black lightning and black flame. In response, I activated Cease Motion, which is super effective against purely energy-based attacks. When the lightning and flames reached the range of my defense, They immediately dispersed into nothingness since pure energy itself possessed no mass, causing it to be dissipated. White ice magic is the perfect counter to a lot of projectile-based assaults. In fact, I would say it's just as good if not better than Beelzebub. Kuahahahahaha. Impressive, Rimuru. But let's see you take this, he yelled as he put his hands together to form some kind of hand sign. This motherfucker. Domain expansion. World of raging storms. He announced loudly, and his eyes began to glow bright blue with sparks of lightning coming from them. In the next moment, dark storm clouds began enveloping the area inside the barrier and lightning started striking the ground everywhere. The winds were extremely violent, which made standing still incredibly difficult. This attack was most likely Storm of Destruction, the superior version of Death Storm. When storm magic is used to its absolute best by the most adept wielder of it, the result is a terrifying storm strong enough to easily destroy civilizations. Quick on my feet, I started dodging the onslaught of thunderbolts, but quite a few came really close to hitting me thanks to Veldora's probability manipulation. These bolts aren't normal since I could tell that they were capable of damaging the spiritual body directly. Unfortunately for me, I felt a large surge of electricity throughout my body and soul as I failed to dodge a stray thunderbolt. TCH. Seal, how much damage did that do to my soul? Around 5%. Rimuru-sama. That's not good. Getting hit by one of those is dangerous. At best, I could survive 20 hits before I perish. Considering my soul is abnormally strong and the fact those bolts dealt 5% of damage to my spiritual body means they're serious business. This storm could go on for a very long time thanks to Veldora's massive magicule pool. I'll be dead before he completely exhausts himself. Regaining my composure, I quickly decreased the range of cease motion, which subsequently increased the magnitude of deceleration placed on incoming threats. My hope was that any stray thunderbolt would get slowed down enough to where I could dodge them just in time. If I'm lucky, the skill could totally disperse all the energy and I'll be completely safe. I dashed towards Veldora while firing a barrage of frost beam at him. It's a heavily concentrated beam of energy that paradoxically has a temperature of absolute zero. Because of this property, the beam absorbs surrounding energy and returns it to the source, dealing massive damage to the target. Veldora dodged extremely well but was eventually hit by one of the beams. This completely blew off his right arm and it looked like he had a large chunk bitten off his side. However, it quickly regenerated and I stopped launching the beams at him. As expected, he won't be put down that easily. Still, I'm shocked that I even managed to damage him at all. Kuahahahahaha. Impressive, Rimuru. You managed to damage me somewhat. He praised me loudly, but I continued rushing towards him with my next move prepared. Ha ha ha. Quit talking mid-battle, old man. I replied loudly as the distance between us was now only a few meters. Activating Shub Niggurath's skill nullification, I bypassed Veldora's barriers and hindered his probability manipulation, which allowed me to land my next experimental attack, Hail Flash. It is similar to Black Flash, but imbued with white ice magic instead. The hit absorbs the opponent's kinetic energy upon impact and effectively freezes them in place for several seconds. However, due to Veldora's nature as a true dragon, the attack would only prohibit his movement for a second at best. When my punch made contact with Veldora's stomach, a flash freeze enveloped his body which ceased all his motion. I didn't have much time and I had a few hundredths of a second at best before he regained his movement. But this was more than enough time for me to execute my next move. It's time to end this, Veldora, I proclaimed boldly and I snapped my fingers. Following the snap, a series of massive chains made from white ice began manifesting out of thin air and quickly wrapped themselves around Veldora's motionless figure. The time he froze for was barely enough for verglass binding to take effect as he regained his movement just milliseconds after the binding took effect. Too slow, old man. Victory is within reach. To explain a little further, Verglass Binding is an upgraded version of unlimited imprisonment that I created to allow me to completely immobilize an opponent without the use of time stop. It's much more effective than its predecessor and only the user can lift the seal in most cases. I can even specify the amount of time the target is frozen for. However, the trade-off is that the target must be completely immobilized beforehand. A difficult task when you're trying to seal a true dragon. Oh, Rimuru. This is a foul. Are you trying to seal me away like what Kenjaku did to Gojo? He asked furiously. Sigh. Even in a situation like this he's still thinking about manga. Ha ha ha. Not at all. Veldora-kun. You'll be released in about 1 minute. Just enough time for me to pull that off. I replied ambiguously while giving him an evil grin. Veldora looked puzzled and somewhat concerned as I left him inside the bind. Now a few dozen meters away from him, I conjured up my most dangerous attack. It was something that Seal and I have been analyzing for the past few weeks ever since I acquired God of Void, Azathoth. This ultimate skill is noted by Seal to be the pinnacle of ultimate skills. It grants the user powerful offense and defense, as well as utility. But the most devastating and terrifying aspect of this skill is the uncontrollable, imaginary collapse. This skill scares the shit out of me, to be perfectly honest. Even with CL's near-flawless control over my skills, we are still unable to utilize it safely. This skill allows me to generate what Seal called the most destructive energy source in the multiverse. This energy goes by many names, such as turn null, nihility, and the essence of true nothingness. If I were to equate it to something scientific, it would be the elusive antimatter. Just a tiny bit of this energy is enough to easily obliterate entire planets. Keeping that in mind, I made sure to release an extremely minuscule amount of it at Veldora. The reason I needed to put him in a bind for a minute was that I needed utmost focus to make sure I didn't accidentally generate an excessive amount of this energy. Without Seal assisting me in this battle, the task was proving to be difficult but still doable. Fortunately for the world outside the barrier, Velzard made it sturdy enough to contain the destructive force of this attack. Kuahahahahaha. Time's almost up, Rimuru. You have 10 seconds left before I give you the beatdown of a lifetime. Veldora screamed triumphantly. Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. I'll be the one laughing in the end, old man. That's all the time I need, I proclaimed loudly, and I raised my right hand in front of me with my thumb over my middle and index fingers. Veldora's confident demeanor immediately vanished and a look of sheer horror appeared on his face upon seeing my actions. Wait. Rimuru. What are you doing? He started panicking and desperately tried to escape the bind. 9 ropes. Polarized light. Crow and Shomio. The gap between within and without. By the name of Rimuru Tempest. Heed my word. Destroy it all, Azathoth. I uttered the chant that was definitely necessary, by the way. The tip of my 2 fingers began glowing with a dark purple light containing pure destructive energy. Imaginary technique. Hollow collapse. I said in utter victory and flicked my fingers, sending forth the uncontrollable power of imaginary collapse, that I gave a bit of a rename for dramatic effect. Instantly, darkness filled my entire vision as the destructive power of nihility engulfed the entirety of the area inside the barrier. My body and soul started taking steady damage as the tiny amount of energy I released continued unleashing waves upon waves of destruction. Shit. My body hurts. My soul hurts. This shouldn't even be possible in the first place, yet here I am feeling immense pain. 6% damage sustained by the body and soul of Rimuru-sama. Just then, Seal gave me a report of the damage I was currently receiving. It's time to see if all that testing has paid off. 7%. 9%. 13%. 20%. The number began rising quickly but halted at 20%. As briefly as it came, it vanished. I managed to survive using imaginary collapse, while only sustaining 20% damage, not including the 5% Veldora did early. That might sound like a lot, but that's actually a lot better than my previous and smaller scale tests. The dust eventually cleared as I floated several meters above the now destroyed ground. All that remained inside the barrier was a massive crater nearly 100 meters deep. The barrier itself also had a few noticeable cracks on it. I guess it couldn't fully contain nihility. Veldora was nowhere to be seen, his body having been completely obliterated by the attack. Thankfully, his soul and memories were safely stored inside me so I could revive him perfectly. Doing just that, I created a clone of myself and activated True Dragon Release, Storm, and just like that, Veldora was back. He appeared shocked at what happened, but he quickly regained his composure and struck a pose. Kuahahahahaha. You actually managed to defeat me. I'm proud of you, Rimuru. As expected of my sworn brother, He praised me wholeheartedly with a cheerful smile, much to my surprise. He then extended his fist out for a fist bump. His unexpected behavior and actions actually tugged at my heartstrings, as I expected him to be salty or in denial about his loss. Instead, he gladly admitted defeat and praised me like a true bro. I guess he really has matured. Smiling back at him, I bumped his fist. After our quick bonding as sworn brothers, reality suddenly struck me. I looked around at the cracked barrier and then apprehensively turned my head down. What I witnessed was truly horrifying. I didn't pay much mind to it earlier since I was still elated from my victory, but this is... What have I done? The ground here is totally destroyed now. I went too far, I yelled dejectedly at my grave error, but Veldora laughed and slapped me in the back. Motherfucker, what was that for? Kuahahahahaha. No need to worry, Rimuru. Check this out, fertile paradox, he uttered loudly while extending his open palm down to the ground. Instantly, the large crater on the ground began to fill up with earth and the grass grew back. The skill he used effectively healed the damage that the land sustained from my devastating move. A few seconds later, the ground beneath us fully returned to its original state. It's like we never had the intense battle that devastated the land. Now that the land was healed, Veldora and I floated down gently. Our feet touched the ground with everything was back to how it was before the spar. Velzard dispelled her barrier and warped a few meters ahead of us while the large group of spectators began running toward us. Veldora became somewhat nervous as she approached, but after seeing her gentle smile, he calmed down. Foo, spectacular battle, you too. I'm proud of your growth, Veldora-kun. Keep it up, and before long, you'll far surpass Velgren-chan and maybe even reach me one day. Velzard praised genuinely, and Veldora had a flustered look on his face while he scratched the back of his head, embarrassed by his sister's compliment. She then turned to me with the same warm smile. Rimuru-kun, you surprise me once again. Foo, I don't even have words anymore. You truly are incredible, she said softly and walked closer to me before suddenly kissing me on the cheek. What the hell? Velzard, in front of your brother too? I felt my face heat up like crazy and covered my face in sheer embarrassment, to which Velzard reacted by giggling lightly. After a few seconds, I uncovered my face and saw Veldora looking away nervously. He did not want to see what just happened. Sigh, sometimes I get him. His elder sister is a handful to deal with. But maybe that's part of the reason why I like her. Velzard then turned around to face her brother. Foo, don't mind my little brother behind me, Rimuru-kun. You saw nothing, right, Veldora-kun? She asked with her signature scary tone paired with a death smile. Veldora quivered in fear before nodding furiously. Why yes. I saw nothing. Velzard nay, he affirmed profusely. Velzard's smile became gentle and she nodded in satisfaction. She's scary. Foo, good, she said, satisfied. I looked to my left and saw that the group had now reached us. My subordinates were looking thrilled, meanwhile Luminous and her companions looked utterly done with life. Rimuru-sama.